Sarah Martinez was just trying to pick up groceries when a group of affluent teenagers started filming her rusty old Honda and posting cruel videos about poor people who couldn't afford decent cars. They had no idea her husband owned the most exclusive luxury car dealership in the city. What happened next will leave you speechless. Sarah had always believed that a car was simply a tool to get from point A to point B, while her friends obsessed over the latest models and spent their weekends washing and waxing their vehicles. She was perfectly content with her 15-year-old Honda Civic. Sure, it had seen better days. The paint was faded, there was a dent on the passenger side from a shopping cart incident 3 years ago, and the exhaust pipe made a rattling sound that got worse every month. But it ran, it was paid off, and it served its purpose. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, Sarah worked as a librarian at the downtown branch, a job she genuinely loved despite the modest salary. She spent her days helping children discover new books, assisting elderly patrons with research, and maintaining the quiet sanctuary that libraries provided in an increasingly chaotic world. Her colleagues often commented on her contentment, her ability to find joy in simple things, and her genuine kindness toward everyone she encountered. What most people didn't know about Sarah was that her modest lifestyle was a conscious choice rather than a financial necessity. Her husband David owned Martinez Luxury Motors, the premier destination for high-end vehicles in their metropolitan area. The dealership specialized in Ferrari, Lamborghini, Bentley, and other exotic cars that most people could only dream of owning. David had built the business from a small used car lot into a multi-million-dollar empire over the past 12 years. Despite their substantial wealth, Sarah and David had made a mutual decision early in their marriage to live simply and give generously. They owned a comfortable but not ostentatious home in a middle-class neighborhood, donated significant portions of their income to various charities, and avoided the flashy lifestyle that their financial situation could easily support. Sarah's choice to drive an old Honda wasn't about money, it was about values. On that particular Thursday afternoon in late September, Sarah had just finished her shift at the library and stopped at Riverside Shopping Center to pick up ingredients for dinner. She parked her Honda in the lot outside Whole Foods, grabbed her reusable shopping bags and headed inside. The shopping trip was routine and pleasant. She chatted with the cashier about weekend plans, helped an elderly man reach something on a high shelf, and selected fresh flowers for her kitchen table. When she emerged from the store 45 minutes later, arms full of grocery bags, she noticed a small crowd had gathered near her car. At first she assumed there had been some kind of accident or emergency. But as she got closer, she realized the crowd consisted of 4 well-dressed teenagers, probably around 17 or 18 years old, and they were all focused on her vehicle. The apparent leader of the group was a girl with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and an expensive handbag that Sarah recognized as costing more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. Her name was Jessica, though Sarah wouldn't learn this until later. Jessica was holding her phone, clearly recording video, while the others laughed and made comments. "Oh my God, look at this piece of junk," Jessica was saying to her phone camera. "Like, how is this thing even legal to drive on the road? The rust alone is probably a safety hazard." The other teenagers giggled and moved closer to get better angles for what was clearly becoming some kind of social media content. A boy wearing a varsity jacket from one of the area's most exclusive private schools pointed at the dent on the passenger side. "Dude, that looks like it got hit by a meteor or something. I bet the owner bought this thing for like $500 from some sketchy used car lot." Another girl, this one with elaborate nail art and jewelry that caught the afternoon sunlight, wrinkled her nose in exaggerated disgust. "Can you imagine having to be seen in something like this? I would literally rather walk everywhere than drive something so embarrassing. My dad always says you can tell everything you need to know about a person by the car they drive." Jessica continued her commentary for the camera, her voice getting louder and more theatrical with each observation. "I'm standing here in the parking lot of Whole Foods, and I just had to share this with you guys because this is literally the most pathetic excuse for a car I have ever seen in my entire life. The owner is probably inside spending their food stamps on organic kale thinking they're so sophisticated." Sarah stopped walking, still about 20 feet away from her car, and felt her cheeks begin to burn with embarrassment. Other shoppers were starting to notice the commotion, and some were pulling out their own phones to record what was happening. A few people looked uncomfortable with the teenagers' behavior, but no one said anything to stop them. The boy in the varsity jacket noticed Sarah approaching with her grocery bags and must have realized she was the owner of the vehicle they were mocking. Instead of showing any shame or stopping their cruel commentary, he actually seemed excited by this development. "Oh wow guys, I think this is her. This is actually the owner of this disaster on wheels." Jessica immediately turned her phone camera towards Sarah, who was still walking slowly toward her car, hoping somehow to avoid a confrontation. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jessica called out in a voice dripping with false politeness, "is this your car?" Sarah nodded quietly, fumbling in her purse for her keys and hoping she could just load her groceries and leave without further incident. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Jessica and her friends were clearly not finished with their entertainment. "Oh honey," the girl with the elaborate nails said, her voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear, "you know there are programs that can help people in your situation, right? Like there are charities that provide reliable transportation for people who can't afford proper cars. You don't have to keep driving something that's literally falling apart." The fourth member of their group, a boy with designer sunglasses and a watch that probably cost more than Sarah's annual salary, laughed and shook his head. "My mom volunteers for one of those organizations. They help disadvantaged families get access to decent vehicles so their kids don't have to be embarrassed at school. You should look into it." Jessica kept her camera rolling, clearly delighted by the content she was creating. "This is like a perfect example of what I was talking about in my last video about social awareness. Some people just don't understand that your appearance and your possessions reflect your place in society. When you drive something like this, you're basically advertising that you've given up on yourself." Sarah had reached her car by this point and was trying to unlock the trunk to load her groceries, but her hands were shaking so badly that she kept missing the keyhole. The teenagers' laughter and commentary continued, and she could see other shoppers stopping to watch the spectacle. Some looked sympathetic, but most seemed more interested in the drama than in helping. "Maybe we should start a GoFundMe," the boy in the varsity jacket suggested with mock concern. "Help this poor woman get some reliable transportation so she doesn't have to risk her life driving this death trap around town." The girl with the nail art pulled out her own phone and started taking pictures. "I'm definitely posting about this. My followers need to see what rock bottom actually looks like. This is what happens when you don't invest in yourself and make smart financial decisions." Sarah finally managed to open her trunk and began loading her grocery bags, trying to ignore the running commentary about her character, her life choices, and her presumed financial situation. The teenagers showed no signs of losing interest in their cruel game, and Jessica kept adding to her video with increasingly vicious observations. "The really sad part," Jessica continued for her social media audience, "is that she's shopping at Whole Foods, which means she's spending money on expensive organic food instead of saving up for a car that won't embarrass her every time she leaves the house. It's like priorities, you know? Some people just don't understand how the world works." As Sarah closed her trunk and prepared to get into the driver's seat, she noticed that a small crowd of onlookers had gathered. Some were recording with their own phones, apparently planning to share their own versions of the humiliation she was experiencing. Others looked uncomfortable but seemed frozen, unsure whether or how they should intervene. The boy with the expensive sunglasses walked closer to Sarah's car and examined it with exaggerated interest, like he was studying a museum exhibit. "The really fascinating thing," he announced to the crowd, "is how someone can let a car get to this condition. Like there's neglect, and then there's whatever this is. This is like a case study in giving up on life." Sarah got into her car, her heart pounding and her face burning with humiliation. She could hear the teenagers' laughter even through her closed windows, and she could see Jessica still recording, apparently planning to capture her departure as the finale to her cruel social media content. As she started the engine, which made its usual collection of concerning sounds, the teenagers erupted in fresh laughter. Jessica provided commentary for her video about the pathetic sounds the car was making and speculated about whether it would even make it out of the parking lot. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, gathering herself and trying to process what had just happened. She had been publicly humiliated by strangers who knew nothing about her life, her circumstances, or her choices. They had made assumptions about her character and her worth based solely on the appearance of her vehicle, and they had turned her into entertainment for their social media followers. But as Sarah drove home that afternoon, listening to the familiar rattles and squeaks of her old Honda, something interesting began to happen. The initial shock and embarrassment started to transform into something else entirely. She thought about Jessica and her friends, about their casual cruelty and their absolute certainty that they were superior to her based on material possessions. She thought about the assumptions they had made, the things they had said about programs for disadvantaged families and charitable organizations that help people get reliable transportation. They had no idea that she could walk into any luxury car dealership in the city and buy whatever vehicle she wanted without even checking her bank balance. When Sarah arrived home, she found David in his home office reviewing sales reports from Martinez Luxury Motors. Their house was comfortable but not flashy, decorated with books and family photos rather than expensive art or luxury items. David looked up from his paperwork and immediately noticed something was wrong with his wife's expression. "How was your day?" he asked, setting aside his documents and giving her his full attention. Sarah sat down across from his desk and told him everything that had happened at the shopping center. She described Jessica's video, the other teenagers' commentary, the crowd of onlookers, and the absolute humiliation of being treated like a charity case in front of dozens of strangers. David listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail of the story. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing what she had told him. "What were their names?" he finally asked. "I don't know their real names," Sarah replied, "but the girl who was recording called herself Jessica something on the video. She mentioned her followers, so she must have a significant social media presence." David nodded thoughtfully and turned to his computer. After a few minutes of searching local social media accounts and cross-referencing the details Sarah had provided, he found what he was looking for. "Jessica Morrison," he said, turning his laptop screen towards Sarah, 17 years old, daughter of Richard Morrison, who owns Morrison Financial Services. She has about 15,000 followers on Instagram and posts regularly about luxury lifestyle content. Sarah looked at the screen and recognized the girl who had led the cruel commentary about her car. Jessica's social media feed was exactly what she would have expected: expensive clothes, luxury vacations, high-end restaurants, and motivational posts about success and social status. "The interesting thing," David continued, clicking through more profiles, "is that her father, Richard Morrison, is one of our biggest clients. He's purchased 4 cars from us in the past 2 years, including that new Lamborghini Huracan he picked up last month." Sarah felt her eyebrows raise. "You know her father?" "Very well," David replied with a slight smile. "He's actually coming in tomorrow to look at a new Ferrari. He's been talking about adding it to his collection for months." As David continued researching the other teenagers from Sarah's description, he discovered that they were all connected to families who were significant clients of Martinez Luxury Motors. The boy in the varsity jacket was Kevin Anderson, whose mother had recently purchased a new Bentley. The girl with the elaborate nails was Sophia Chen, whose family owned a chain of high-end restaurants and had bought 3 luxury vehicles from David's dealership in the past year. "You know what, Sarah?" David said, leaning back in his chair. "I think it's time these young people learned something important about making assumptions and treating others with respect. But that's a story for tomorrow." What Jessica Morrison and her friends were about to discover would change everything they thought they knew about judging people by their possessions, and the consequences would be more devastating than they could have ever imagined. The next morning, David arrived at Martinez Luxury Motors earlier than usual. He had spent most of the previous evening thinking about what Sarah had endured and formulating a plan that would teach Jessica Morrison and her friends a valuable lesson about respect and assumptions. He wasn't interested in destroying anyone's life, but he believed strongly that actions should have consequences. Richard Morrison arrived at the dealership precisely at 10 o'clock, just as he had scheduled. He was a man in his early 50s who carried himself with the confidence that comes from significant wealth and social status. His handshake was firm, his smile was practiced, and his expectations were high. He had been looking forward to this appointment for weeks, eager to add a new Ferrari 488 GTB to his collection. David greeted Richard warmly, as he always did with his premium clients. They had developed a good relationship over the years, built on mutual respect and successful business transactions. Richard trusted David's expertise and recommendations, while David appreciated Richard's straightforward approach to purchasing luxury vehicles. "David, my friend," Richard said as they walked through the showroom, "I've been thinking about that Ferrari all week. My wife thinks I'm crazy for wanting another car, but you understand the appeal better than anyone." "Of course," David replied smoothly. Before we look at the Ferrari though, I wanted to discuss something else with you. It's about your daughter Jessica. Richard's expression shifted slightly, a mix of pride and concern crossing his face. Jessica, what about her? She hasn't been giving you any trouble, has she? David led Richard to his private office, where they could speak without interruption. Yesterday, my wife Sarah had an experience that I think you should know about. Jessica and some of her friends encountered Sarah at Riverside Shopping Center, and there was an incident involving Sarah's car. Richard sat forward in his chair, his businessman's instincts immediately alert to potential problems. What kind of incident? David carefully recounted the events Sarah had described, explaining how Jessica had filmed and mocked Sarah's old Honda, made cruel comments about her presumed financial situation, and created social media content designed to humiliate a stranger. He spoke calmly and factually, without emotional embellishment, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. As David spoke, Richard's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally anger. When David finished, Richard was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Richard asked finally. "Completely certain," David replied. "Sarah described Jessica perfectly, and we were able to confirm it was her through her social media posts. She actually uploaded the video to her Instagram account yesterday evening." Richard pulled out his phone and quickly navigated to his daughter's Instagram profile. What he saw there made his face go pale. There was Jessica's video, complete with cruel commentary about the pathetic excuse for a car and its presumably impoverished owner. The video had already received dozens of likes and comments from her followers, many of whom had added their own disparaging remarks. "I am so sorry," Richard said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This behavior is completely unacceptable. I had no idea Jessica was capable of this kind of cruelty." David nodded sympathetically. "I understand this is difficult, Richard, but there's something else you should know. The woman Jessica was mocking, Sarah, is my wife." Richard's eyes widened in shock and horror. "Your wife? Oh my God, David, I am mortified. Absolutely mortified. Jessica has no idea who she was dealing with, but that doesn't excuse this behavior in any way." "I'm not telling you this to threaten you or your business relationship with us," David said carefully, "but I do think Jessica needs to understand that her actions have consequences, and that the assumptions she makes about people can be completely wrong." Richard was already standing up, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "You're absolutely right. This is unacceptable on every level. Jessica is going to face serious consequences for this behavior, I can promise you that." "Before you go," David said, "there's one more thing. Jessica mentioned in her video that her followers needed to see what rock bottom looked like. I think it might be educational for her to understand what real success and humility actually look like." Richard paused at the door. "What do you mean?" "Bring Jessica here tomorrow afternoon," David suggested. "Let her meet Sarah properly, and let her see what kind of person she was actually mocking. Sometimes the best education comes from face-to-face encounters with reality." Richard nodded grimly. "I'll bring her." "And David, again, I am so incredibly sorry about this. Jessica's behavior reflects poorly on our entire family." That evening, Richard Morrison had the most difficult conversation he had ever had with his daughter. He confronted Jessica about the video, showed her exactly what she had posted, and explained who Sarah actually was. Jessica's initial defiance quickly crumbled when she realized the magnitude of her mistake. "But Dad," Jessica protested weakly, "how was I supposed to know? She was driving that terrible car and she looked so ordinary. I was just having fun with my friends." "That's exactly the problem," Richard replied sternly. "You were having fun at the expense of a stranger who had done nothing to you. You made assumptions about her worth as a person based on her possessions, and you were completely wrong about everything." Jessica tried several more justifications, but each one sounded more pathetic than the last. The reality of what she had done was beginning to sink in, and with it came the understanding that her actions might have serious consequences for her family's relationship with Martinez Luxury Motors. The next afternoon, Richard arrived at the dealership with a very subdued Jessica in tow. She had deleted the offensive video from her social media accounts and spent the morning reading about the importance of treating others with respect, but she still had no real understanding of the gravity of her situation. David met them in the showroom where Sarah was waiting. Jessica barely recognized the woman she had mocked so cruelly just 2 days earlier. Today Sarah was dressed professionally but simply, and she carried herself with quiet dignity that Jessica had completely missed during their first encounter. Jessica, David said calmly, I'd like you to meet my wife Sarah Martinez. The color drained from Jessica's face as the full impact of the introduction hit her. This wasn't just some random person she had mocked for social media content. This was the wife of one of the most successful luxury car dealers in the city, a woman whose family could probably buy and sell Jessica's family several times over. Mrs. Martinez, Jessica stammered, I am so sorry about what happened. I was wrong, and I know there's no excuse for how I treated you. Sarah looked at the teenager for a long moment before responding. Jessica, can you tell me why you thought it was appropriate to film me without my permission and post cruel comments about me online? Jessica struggled to find words that didn't make her sound even more shallow and cruel than she already appeared. I don't know, she finally admitted. I guess I thought it was funny, and my followers like that kind of content. But I realize now how wrong I was. What exactly did you think you knew about me based on my car? Sarah continued, I thought you couldn't afford anything better, Jessica said quietly. I thought you were poor, and I made fun of you for it. But that was horrible of me, even if you had been struggling financially. Nobody deserves to be treated that way. Your father has excellent taste in cars, David explained, but Sarah and I have made different choices about how we want to live our lives. Sarah drives an old Honda because she values substance over appearance, compassion over status symbols. Jessica looked around at the gleaming luxury vehicles, each one worth more than her family's house, and began to understand the depth of her misjudgment. You could afford any of these cars, she said to Sarah, her voice barely above a whisper. Many of them, Sarah confirmed, but I prefer to spend our money on things that matter more to me. We support several charities, we help families in need, and we live simply because we choose to, not because we have to. The lesson was devastating in its simplicity. Jessica had attacked someone she perceived as inferior, only to discover that Sarah was actually far wealthier and more successful than she was. More importantly, Sarah had achieved that success while maintaining the kind of humility and kindness that Jessica clearly lacked. Over the following weeks, the consequences of Jessica's actions extended far beyond her family's embarrassment. The incident had been a wake-up call for Richard Morrison, who realized that his parenting had failed to instill basic empathy and respect in his daughter. Jessica was required to volunteer at a local charity that provided transportation assistance to low-income families. She spent her weekends helping people who actually did struggle with reliable transportation, learning firsthand about the challenges faced by those less fortunate than herself. Her social media accounts were closely monitored, and she was required to post content promoting kindness and social responsibility instead of the superficial lifestyle content she had previously favored. The experience was humbling and educational in ways that all her previous privileges had never been. Richard and David's business relationship continued, but it was now built on a foundation of mutual respect that extended beyond financial transactions. Richard had learned that true class and character couldn't be measured by possessions, and David had demonstrated that real power lay in choosing mercy over revenge. Sarah continued driving her old Honda, though she eventually did replace it when it finally broke down beyond repair. Her new car was a modest sedan, reliable but unremarkable, because she had learned that her choices reflected her values, not her limitations. The incident had taught everyone involved valuable lessons about assumptions, respect, and the difference between having wealth and having character. Jessica had learned that cruelty has consequences, Richard had learned that parenting requires teaching empathy, and Sarah had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simple dignity. Years later, Jessica would look back on that humiliating afternoon at the luxury car dealership as the moment that changed her perspective on life. She had learned that true worth couldn't be measured by possessions, that kindness was more valuable than status, and that the assumptions we make about others often reveal more about our own character than theirs. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.